Okay. Just want to see if everybody comes in automatically. It seems like there's 10 people in. Hi, everybody. I would just like to know if you can maybe see if you can raise a hand, or just say in the chats if you can listen, can hear us, and that you are in. But thanks a lot. Welcome, yeah, from me, LTV Tech Johan, and I really like to thank Alex from PV Stop that he's going to present first, and then Willem from VM. I'm not sure, Willem, is it VM or is it WIAM? How do you?
You're correct. It's from VM Consulting. We engineering consulting company.
Okay, yeah. So thanks a lot for joining us. We can learn a lot from that, and I think that's going to be very informative. So I think I see lots of people are in, so I don't want to delay anything, but let's just give chance for some of them just to come in. See, there's 13. So yeah, what we've got here, a mix of everybody from the industries. I see there's a few firemen from City of Tshwane. We've engaged with them, and we welcome you guys as well. We started working with you guys, and we really appreciated your engagement and to learn. You know, we've got knowledge, and we learn from you as well. So from everybody here, we're glad that you joined. So yeah, I think while people coming in, let's just see. There's something in the chat. You're welcome to chat there. You can also add your questions and answers later on. So what we will do is basically the programmer, Alex from PV Stop, he's all the way from the UK. I'm going to introduce him now. So he's going to go first, and then Willem, and then we're going to go to questions and answers. So then it's easy. So yeah.
Why PV safety matters. Across rooftops and open fields, solar panels promise a cleaner future. But behind that promise lies a powerful, often misunderstood force: direct current electricity. When things go wrong, they go wrong silently and fast. These images aren't from far-off disasters. They're real examples of what can happen when PV systems are not installed correctly, when safety protocols are skipped, or when no one was prepared to respond. DC arcing is invisible until it's catastrophic. Once it starts, it can't be stopped with a regular circuit breaker. The sun becomes the source of power, and unless it's blocked, the flow continues. First responders often hesitate, not because they lack bravery, but because they aren't trained for solar risks. That's why we're here, to raise awareness, to share what we know, and to help every stakeholder, from insurers and engineers to safety officers and fire chiefs, understand the real risks and how to make PV systems safe. This isn't about products, it's about prevention. Welcome to the PV Safety and Risk Awareness webinar.
Yep, happy to. Firstly, big thank you to Johan for organising this, giving us the opportunity to kind of share some information about what we're doing, what we tend to focus on. We're a PV Stop. It is a relatively unique solution, solar safety solution. We're primarily focused on the symptoms of when a PV system is compromised. So when it fails, either electrically as an electrical fault, or when it's compromised by an external event, by a fire, which is likely to start in other places as well. So I believe fires, structure fires, the probability of them starting is much more likely. The probability is higher that it will start in a kitchen, a garage, a workshop, an overloaded circuit somewhere within the house. Electrical origin seems to be predominantly what we're seeing. And then adding or applying a PV system to the structure or integrating it within the structure clearly compromises that structure's ability to be able to deal with any kind of fire event. So we are a solution that primarily addresses the symptoms of when PV systems fail. We've coined the phrase the DC danger zone. So I'll go into more detail within the presentation. We're active in about 30 countries at the moment with PV Stop. The global pioneer of our solution was London Fire Brigade back in 2018. Following that, Singapore Civil Defence Force, New York Fire Department, and firefighters around the world were very quick to embrace our solution, helping them understand the nature of the risks and the exposure that they have is a key part of that, the education and training. But clearly this extends beyond the burden of responsibility for firefighters as first responders. First responders, we include electrical technicians, building safety responsible, fire marshals, fire wardens. But ultimately, we've got to be realistic. PV systems tend to be applied up on the roof. They tend to be not quite fit and forget. I think some elements of the solar industry would be quite happy to just kind of just do installations, but there is an obligation there for inspection, maintenance, cleaning throughout the life cycle of a solar system, which needs to be considered. So with that, I'll get going. So Johan, if you don't mind, next slide. So in very simple terms, solar panels cannot be easily switched off. So as long as the solar panels are exposed to light, they continue to produce dangerous amounts of DC electricity. So as I was just explaining, in professional terms, this is known as the DC danger zone. And this is a live DC current, as long as the light's hitting the panels. There's no easy way to actually just turn them off. So up until recently, there's been really no practical solution to a globally recognized and growing problem. Next slide, please. So a short clip, but very informative and instructive one. I wanted it to play in silence so you could hear the sound. Hopefully that sound of the electrical fire came through quite clearly. It's an aggressive fire. It will consume and carry on consuming until there's nothing left to burn. But you're looking at a significant electrical arcing event, which is obviously dangerous and risky from an electrical perspective, but it's also a significant thermal event. So you're talking about temperatures upwards of probably in the regions of 12, 14,000 degrees C. It's like touching the sun. This is a very destructive component. What you're seeing here is a combiner box failure. So this is where the strings are combined in the cabling sense to create a parallel circuit. And when there's a fault within the combiner box, whether that's exposed above ground or underground, it's a significant challenge to be able to stop that. You can also see that the smoke generated, the toxic gases that are being generated from the burning panels and the combustion element present serious breathing risks and challenges around that as well. Left unattended, this will burn out, but it'd be like a Chinese firecracker. Once you set fire, or the panels themselves start burning, that will just continuously burn from left to right. So there's some challenges around how this can be approached. It's an electrical origin source, water. Excessive volumes of water can be effective, but that water will dry out, evaporate, and then the problem could reignite. So secondary reignition is a big challenge around this. So this is a challenging picture in terms of how do you even start to approach an incident like this. So hopefully with the knowledge I'm going to give you over the next part of the presentation, we can probably come back to this, Johan, at the end, and then we can talk about how to address it in a safe way. So I think we all know solar is growing exponentially. It is in itself done well, a very safe technology. But like I was saying earlier, it needs that inspection, maintenance, cleaning regime over the course of its lifetime. And what you're dealing with here is electrical components which are exposed to all different types of weather systems. So here in the UK, we've got around 1.6 million PV installations, around about 3,000 a week that we're seeing here. And this is mirrored around the world. Different states of development for different countries, the pressing need on energy stability, energy costs and utility costs have been increasing significantly. So people are naturally leaning towards a cheaper type of electricity, but underpinning it really is the regulations and legislation for net zero. We as a society, we are transitioning away from fossil fuels to renewable energy technologies, and solar is leading the pack at the moment. So we took our learnings, and where PV Stop was originally conceived was Australia. Australia is a much more mature solar market. They're touching generation 4 solar. They've calculated on average about 19 years is the average lifespan of a PV system before you need to then remove and replace, decommission safely, remove and replace. But Australia have grown far quicker than any other country on the planet. And in Australia at the moment, I believe the statistic they've just tipped into 1 in 3 structures have PV systems applied or integrated within the structure. So this kind of rapid exponential growth presented some challenges. They clearly identified that there was a DC issue with a live DC current issue with PV panels, that there wasn't an easy way to turn them off. There's methods for partial de-energizing. There's methods for isolation. So most importantly, from a first responder perspective, is that you can isolate the supply of AC electricity. So solar panels generate the DC electricity, which then goes to the inverter, which then converts to AC. So then we can use that with our standard plug sockets in the normal household or business operations. So in Australia, they decided it would be a good idea to put a second DC isolation switch at the panel level on the roof. And they saw a spike in 500% increase in incidents involving solar PV systems, just purely as a result of this regulation of putting a second DC isolation switch on the roof. Now, the DC isolation switch is effective. What it's not particularly good at is surviving on a rooftop environment exposed to the elements, water ingress. And they found that 500% increase was a direct result of poor regulation in Australia. So there's a massive recall around that at the moment. But that certainly escalated everybody's awareness and understanding of the types of risks. And most importantly, the first responders were the first ones to react and provide feedback on this. They realized that there was a live electrical risk when they were approaching these types of incidents. So they had really 2 options. Were they prepared to risk their lives to save the property, which is unlikely? Firefighters especially, priority number 1 is savable life. So evacuate the structure safely with minimal risk to themselves. But when it comes to asset protection, so all the lives that can be saved from the structure or the incident have been made. The second priority is to try and protect the asset. with a live electrical system. The general approach is more defensive. So they will try and contain, they will establish a defensive perimeter, they will stop the fire spreading to adjacent properties, but they will minimize the impact that potential fire and incident can have on the adjacent area. But the reality is it's a form of controlled burn. So the structure, once it gets to a certain stage and the fire's big enough, you're not going to commit resources or materials. So a controlled burn is an effective strategy by making sure it doesn't spread to adjacencies. So I think we all know that the world is on this mad rush to solar energy. So this is just a really quick and interesting chart just to see where we are today in 25 compared to where we are going to be in 2050 as a global energy transition to a clean energy economy. We're really scratching the surface. We're really at about 20% overall, some countries further ahead than others, but 20 to 30% of where we need to be in the coming years. Just gives you an idea of the scale of solar deployment and installations that are coming and will soon, and already are, a significant part of our energy infrastructure. So some very quick details. Photovoltaic, or PV, is light generating electricity. I think it's from the ancient Greek. Each solar cell produces a limited amount of volts. The size of the cell dictates the amps. Most solar cells, in fact, all solar cells are connected in series. And what we're seeing is solar panels can be very small, but also we're now, I think, touching and pushing closer to 750, 800 watts of output from a single panel. So there's continuous efforts to try and generate more energy efficiency and intensity from the same amount of space that's given to a solar panel. A solar panel is then connected, as the solar cells are within a panel. So they're all connected in series to create a string. And then if you want to expand and develop the capacity of the solar system, then all those strings are connected in parallel to provide a much higher output. And this is just to explain the difference really between a residential system, which will be one string or one series of connected panels on a structure, compared to a solar farm, for example, where you're seeing rows and banks of strings to create a much higher output. Very quickly, again, three types of solar PV systems that we tend to focus on. So you've got the grid interactive. So this is most commonly seen on homes, factories, commercial buildings. And this is where the PV system feeds back into the grid. So there is a generation of electricity and the capability to deliver electricity back to the grid. That's spare or excess capacity. You've got off-grid, where traditionally located in remote areas where the grid power is either not available or too expensive to install. And then what we're seeing is increasingly more and more of this type, which is the hybrid, also called grid-connected battery backup. So this is where PV systems are combined with a battery energy storage system, which allows less dependency on the grid, but also the ability to store and hold energy until it's actually needed. This addresses the clear and obvious issue that sunlight generates the electricity, but when we really need it at the night time, when the sun goes down, the solar panels are clearly not as effective. So that's really driving the battery energy storage revolution, and we're just seeing increasingly more structures globally where a PV system, the probability of a battery energy storage system goes up dramatically. And we're also seeing electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations and devices that all feed off the PV system as the main power source. So a little bit, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think it's worth just highlighting and understanding the problem, the key differences between AC and DC electricity. Just to be very clear on this, AC is an alternating current, so it flows, vibrates backwards, forwards, generally has a frequency 50, 60 cycles per second. What this means is that AC electricity is literally going on off very quickly, many times per second. And this, from an electrical risk perspective, gives the opportunity, at least for the person who comes into contact with AC, to be thrown clear. This is a considerable safety issue around AC electricity. It is inherently a bit more dangerous because of the nature of those frequencies. So more electricity can potentially pass through the body with AC, alternating current. A power socket will generally put out about 2.3 kilowatts of electricity. Now, DC, direct current, literally flows in one direction from source to load and has no frequency as a result. So there's no kind of hertz on-off switch which can be detected. So DC current flows in one direction, does not like being switched particularly much, very much. And again, it can potentially arc when switched. So that's the electricity flowing in one direction, trying to find another way to keep flowing. And more importantly, from a personal safety perspective, contact with DC electricity induces the lock-on effect. So this is when, generally through your training or understanding of electrical risks, you see somebody that's literally paralyzed, locked in one position, but in contact with an electrical system. That's the break, the contact with a wooden object or safely insulated to ensure that they can break that connection with the direct current, because at that stage they're literally paralyzed. That's called the lock-on effect or the muscle tetanus effect, and you're just literally locked into that particular system as the current goes through you. So DC is a specific type of risk that needs to be focused on from an electrical safety point of view. Can highlight this further by battery energy storage systems, primarily use DC electricity as their source to load. Electrical vehicles are DC electricity from the batteries to what's like an inverter in a car, electric vehicle. So that will then be converted from DC into electricity through the electric vehicle motor system. And again, just to reiterate the point, so solar panels are generating DC electricity whenever they're exposed to light, and that DC electricity cannot be easily switched off. So just to frame that nature of the problem, so clear here, we've got a threat to life to first responders. By that, we're including electrical contractors, installers, can be fire investigators, can be even risk assessors, fire inspectors, if a system's compromised and the system is also exposed through water. There's water and electricity are great friends when they're together. They're just not particularly nice to us when they come together. So that threat to life has to be taken seriously, and I've attended quite a few conferences now where we generally get invited by pretty heavyweight safety electrical engineers, which is always somewhat humbling. But it also allows us to understand their framing of the DC electrical risks that are coming our way as a society, and something we need to learn and understand and develop the capabilities and awareness to be able to manage those safely. So that threat to life impacts operational protocols, procedures. There's a clear consequential threat to property. So insurance companies are waking up to the nature of the risk, starting to ask some pretty serious questions around that, as are government agencies. And then extended from that, there is a legal threat. So the health and safety legislation around tasking people to work on live electrical systems, even more so when they're compromised. So that has to be very well thought through, because the implications on safety responsible is one that extends upwards through a company. So if people are being tasked to work on a system, we've established generally as a global society that a PV system is a place of work. What are the safe systems of work that should be designated for anybody that's asked to work on that PV system? And that's where the regulations themselves are a little sketchy. I have to be brutally honest, we haven't found any country around the world that has really kind of managed to establish exactly what the safe systems of work are. And you've also got to take into account that it's working from height. You're generally working on roofs. There's all kinds of PPE or safety regulations around safe access to the roof and getting access to the system. There's the technical understanding around that. So there's a lot for employers that are asking their employees to work on systems to get their head around. So there's a significant legal threat around this, and fire investigators, insurance companies know this quite well. So generally, PV systems carried out, installed, well, from the design planning stage to the installation stage. If you're using good, reputable and certified installation companies that understand the commitment is not just a fit and forget, that this is the developing of a relationship and a system relationship that needs to extend for years through the life cycle of the PV system, generally you should not have any problems. It is a very safe technology. As long as it's managed, maintained, cleaned well over its life cycle. But unfortunately, things do happen. So PV systems have been known to fail. There's some good companies out there consolidating data around that. So I'll talk to the top end of what the data is showing at the moment. So reasons for system failure include physical damage, vermin, external animal damage, extreme weather events. But the two most significant areas where PV systems tend to fail is poor workmanship on the installation side. You've got to think first that there's an extremely large amount of components and connections that need to be made to a specific standard when installing a PV system. There are elements which are kind of plug and play, but even there is risk in the wrong hands. And we're human. Mistakes do happen. There's a mad rush to put solar out there at the moment. Everybody wants it. Everybody's looking for cheaper ways to be able to achieve significantly reduced electricity supplies. And in that mad rush, you've even got, I think on Amazon now, you've got a DIY, do it yourself, PV installation kit, but how that's supposed to be done safely is still a mystery to all in terms of looking at roof access, getting up there safely, installing and making sure that every single connection point and component is in good working order. And then second to poor workmanship and installation is component failure. So degradation, where a PV system is not well inspected or maintained, they will degrade. They're in a harsh environment. So the manufacturers themselves work and test and they talk about failure rates. But the fact that they are talking about failure rates as they have to as component manufacturers just puts added pressure on the inspection, the maintenance, and the obligation is on the PV system owner, really, to make sure that they're staying on top of that or they're employing suitable, qualified and competent personnel to do it. Just another interesting fact there, that even when a solar panel system is compromised or damaged, it will still produce power if the connection's there. So this is of particular importance more for post-incident. So where there's been an incident, there's been a PV system involved, and the system itself, if it's still connected and exposed to light, can still be generating DC electricity, providing live cables and challenges around that. So just some examples here very quickly: storm damage, burnt isolation switches, exposed wiring and reignition, especially post-incident, needs to be considered. And what we're seeing as well around the world, water ingression and flooding. A lot of the electrical components of a PV system tend to be put down at ground level where they're easy to work on. They're not on the roof, so there's protection from exposure. But in serious climate events, water ingression through flooding presents another challenge for first responders to consider. So firefighter injuries directly related to solar panels recorded, Switzerland, UK, US. Now there's an issue here with reporting systems. So a lot of injuries which may be considered to be as a direct consequence of PV systems. can be more easily recorded as working from height issues, small electrical events, which then trigger another series of events leading to an injury, tend to be overlooked, that the PV system, most reporting systems don't have the capacity to be able to say that the PV system was involved, or that solar panel involvement was a direct consequence or an instigation, a root cause of that injury in itself. But injuries have been recorded. So BRE Global here in the UK did a very detailed assessment, which we're now working with them to follow up and make that a live system so we can capture more evidential data for evidence-based decision making. At the moment, we're trying to take as much of the subjectivity out of the thinking around safety and solar PV systems by making it data driven. So any kind of logged incident, such as the BRE report, is extremely informative, and it also allows the solar industry to be able to address some of its shortcomings. There has been only one that we've been able to see directly, a fatality directly attributed to solar panels. That took place in Dubai in July 2018. It was a 2-panel system that the guy was a mobile home container house. And he had 2 panels on the roof, which he climbed up, tried to move position, expose himself, and then was subsequently electrocuted off a 2-panel system, which caused a fatal cardiac arrest. And that's the only case we've been able to find globally. It was recorded as cardiac arrest, but the consequence was directly attributed to only 2 solar panels. So, depending on, there's probably other elements there that need to be considered, either his state of health, but it just shows that a 2-panel system is sufficient to be deadly. So Australia, going back to our mature market, over 3 million installations. So the clean energy regulator there, they're kind of a health and safety or a regulation agency, focused on quantifying the amount of installations, the quality of the installations, but they've also been carrying out audits since 2011. They found that 3.4 systems of those 3 million were unsafe, 17 substandard, so a combined 20%, 1 in 5, represented risks that, left unattended or not fixed by competent people, could very easily lead to a compromised PV system, which, again, left unattended or fit and forget, will escalate over quite a long period of time. Will start as an electrical fault, but could escalate to being a significant fire event. So Fire and Rescue New South Wales, their incident response data, I'm sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. So 2011, they were having an incident involving PV systems every 182 days. By 2015, that had increased to every 6 days. And by 2021, incidents every day involving PV systems. That's now climbed. That's now sitting at around 3 to 4 incidents per day across Australia. So these are incidents, I have to be honest, where not just where the PV system's at fault, but where the PV system also becomes involved indirectly and impacts first responder operations. So just to confirm, DC danger zone is the wiring from the solar panel to the inverter, to the inverters where the DC electricity is converted to AC, so it can be used in the structure or elsewhere. So there's the potential for fire, electric shock, and considering where the PV system's located, falls from height. So there is no safe, reliable means of isolation. When we say isolation, what we're really talking about here is complete de-energizing. So we're looking for a solution that can eliminate the hazard, take away the electrical supply completely. Isolation generally means containment or separation of the electrical current in a safe way, a method of holding the electricity in a safe manner so that human lives aren't compromised or affected. The standard emergency response previously has been to cover with tarps, tarpaulins, or treat defensively. Don't engage. So don't take any risk to your life when there's a live electrical system. Make sure the fire's not spreading, clear whatever safety elements are involved in getting people away from the structure that's affected. But that procedure to cover with tarps or tarpaulins or some kind of method of stopping the electricity from being generated is a critical one. So there are existing PV safety technologies, as we've already mentioned: isolation switches, anti-arcing equipment, rapid shutdown microinverters, DC optimizers. Now these are all what we would consider to be, as I've already discussed, isolation is containment, is being able to stop or manage the electrical supply, contain it to one part of the system where it can't hurt people. Anti-arcing, the same. It basically recognizes and triggers a safety mechanism to avoid that electrical arc happening. But there are challenges around that in terms of series and parallel arcing. So it's not a perfect system as it stands. Rapid shutdown microinverters and DC optimizers are excellent pieces of kit. They're designed specifically to be able to help. But there's question marks over their fireproof rating. How do they react, for example, when an external event is compromising the PV system, or the rapid shutdown system itself could be potentially an area where a compromise or a connection failure could occur. So there's a lot of complementary technologies out there, and I mentioned the word complementary because these are viable solutions. These are good, well-designed solutions, but there's still risk. And from a first responder perspective, if you're going to commit your life to be able to either protect the asset or save savable life, you don't want any element of risk involved with your own personal safety. The other major challenge is that a lot of those systems are located downstream. So how do you turn off solar panels? It's a simple answer. You literally block out the light. So light is the source of the power. That's the energy generation source. The light hits the solar panels, creates an electrochemical reaction. The photons generally start to move throughout the cell, and it generates an electrical current. So that light is the source of the power. So we need a solution really that helps us find a way to block out the light. So PV Stop, that's how it originated. It was conceived in Australia by a solar veteran, Luke Williams, over 45 years in the solar industry, but with all that experience, still managed to electrocute himself off a roof. So unfortunately, he became the load with the DC panels, with the solar panels that he was installing at the time. The two cables literally caught by the wind, came and made him the connection point, and he woke up on the floor. Luckily survived the incident. In Australia, there's a lot of single-story buildings, so he didn't have too far to fall, and lucky with a soft landing, but woke up with the idea of, if that can happen to him, with all the knowledge and experience that he's got, it can happen to somebody far less educated, informed, or aware of the challenges. So he kind of woke up with this idea of, how do we create something that delivers that capability to be able to block out the light and make the system safe for when people either working on it directly or responding to an electrical event. So in his head, it had to be kind of non-flammable, fire retardant, because solar panels, when they're going, are pretty extreme thermal events. It needed to be non-conductive and anti-arcing. So obviously that the electrical flow would not be an issue if you're applying something, anything from a safe distance. You don't want that electrical current to be able to flow through the medium that you're using. It should also have the capacity to encapsulate toxic nanoparticles. So basically the burning elements of the solar panel or the electrical arc event release toxic gases. The internal components of a solar panel are not particularly healthy for the environment by their nature of how they need to work. There's a reason why they're encased and contained within glass, steel, metal, and contained within that solar panel. They're not designed to be exposed to external elements, and then obviously a significant electrical or fire event will allow those toxic elements to be released. The other key element is that any kind of solution would need to be a no damage solution. So ideally it would be removable or temporary, because that allows or creates a safe zone to be worked on to fix the problem. And then once the problem's fixed by trained and competent people, it should be relatively easy to peel off or remove from the system and restore it back to operational efficiency. And lastly, in this day and age, environmentally friendly is critical. So the solution had to be non-toxic, non-polluting, and safely disposable as environmentally friendly waste. So this was quite a big challenge that he set himself after this electrical event. But the net result of that was a product called PV Stop, which we can probably go to the next slide.
Here you'll see the procedure for covering the panels with PV Stop and making the solar system panel array safe. Note the number of light globes connected to the demonstration unit, allowing you to see that the system is under an electrical load. This dashboard will measure in real time the reduction of power as PV Stop is applied. The first step is to spray PV Stop horizontally across the centre of a panel array. Note that even the panels are only partially covered. The output is reduced to safe levels in a matter of seconds, and the light globes switch off.
The next step is to completely cover the panels, giving you additional peace of mind that the system is totally safe. With an air temperature of 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit, PV Stop is touch dry within minutes and creates a waterproof coating. Once completely dry, peel it off, or it can sit on your panels for up to 12 months or until you're ready to reactivate your system again.
Right, so from that development, as I was saying, London Fire Brigade were the global pioneer back in 2018. They put us on trial for 18 months. Within 4 months, they'd already come back to us and said, no, it's good. It does what it says on the can. It works, and they used it effectively in a number of incidents over that 4-month period. Extensive training around that, training and competence and feedback. The blessing of going on trial with a fire and rescue service is that you get all the data. You get all the learnings, the operational approach, key learnings, and you get to feed back into that. So it's a communication loop that goes backwards and forwards. But after 4 months, London Fire Brigade said, no, we're going to stop the trial. We're going to treat this as business as usual, which is great. Obviously, as validation of a solution goes, that's really what you're looking for. But Jim Foran, the CEO of PV Stop, said no, we want to carry on the trial, because he knows very well from his experience in working with Australian Fire and Rescue Services, to have a product on trial is the opportunity for both sides to learn and continuously improve the operational protocols around these type of incidents, and that's invaluable learnings. So we actually kept the trial going with London Fire Brigade for the full 18 months. And they freely admit as well that the operational learnings and protocols developed. I'll come to questions probably at the end, if that's okay. So that was a good example. And then another example where PV Stop was deployed to save a school. This was the kind of the silver bullet really for London Fire Brigade, because they'd lost a school building previously because of this reason. So this was a massive opportunity for them to save the actual school. And this was, from a PR point of view, kudos and understanding throughout the fire and rescue service. When they'd lost a school building previously, it never feels good to firefighters. And then PV Stop gave them the opportunity in this second incident to be able to save the school, to effectively de-energize the PV system that was compromised by a fire. And in this case, they managed to save the school. So this was something they highlighted and used extensively in their promotions around adopting new innovation, new safety technologies, and how that was used effectively to save an educational establishment. So that was a really good story for us to have. And that brings me to the end. So the only thing I will add really is as a solution, PV Stop eliminates the hazard. So this is really important to understand as a tier 1 safety solution. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because eliminate the hazard is really the most effective and the safest way of dealing with any type of risk control. Tier 1, eliminate, and tier 5 is PPE. So when you're looking at PPE and understanding how important it is to have insulated gloves, boots, breathing apparatus, PPE is your last line of defense when it comes to personal safety. There's a range of other solutions that sit between tier 1 and tier 5 in the risk controls. But when you're relying on PPE alone to be able to protect you, you just got to remember and realize that that is your last line of defense. There is no form of risk control or safety beyond PPE. So super important that we've gone through as many of the different safety tiers as possible before even relying on PPE. And that was a key learning that we've learned equally from London Fire Brigade, from Singapore and New York Fire Department as well. But thank you very much for your time. Clearly I'm a talker, so I've gone a little bit over time there, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alex. I think we made some time after the presentation, then we'll take the answers. But if you want, if there's somebody can actually answer in the chat, we can start answering that. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alex. And yeah, now Willem, thanks a lot. I don't know if you can try your slides. I see you are muted, and just unmute yourself and you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Juan. Let me just quickly make sure that you can see my slides here. It's not going to make the slide presentation active.
There we go. That's it.
My name is Willem Bekes. I'm a structural fire engineer here in South Africa. I just want to get today, I want to give some understanding and insight regarding the South African building regulations and the solar industry, how they meet each other, and how alternative power energy installations have an effect on the existing building occupation industry. Where there's a lot of misconception in terms of what is regulation and what should be implemented on these systems. So I'm going to focus today a lot on the building regulation, which is our SANS 10400, which goes on the building regulation and how occupancies are protected in standard installations. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a professional civil engineer that's got about 24 years experience in structural and fire engineering in the retail, commercial, hotel, industrial industry. We do a lot of multidisciplinary projects in terms of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, structural and fire. Also been involved in a lot of power stations in South Africa, and also making sure that they are compliant with the current regulation. Also members of the Engineering Council of South Africa and the Civil Engineering Institute of South Africa. just so that you understand where I'm coming from. So my presentation will focus primarily on the occupational instances where these solar systems and battery installation systems meet the existing occupation, which means that there's the existing building. And there's some certain regulations that need to be complied with when you fiddle with the existing occupation. On these pictures, you can see where these interactions meet with the occupations, where we install PV systems on the roofs of existing buildings. And some of them are also originated from the battery systems being installed either inside houses or inside the garages. For the purpose of this presentation today, I'm not going to focus on the battery installations and the cause of fires from the battery energy installation systems, mostly on the PV systems and how the PV systems have an impact on the occupational and on the structural and fire regulations of these occupations. So we have a collision path currently where these two meet, especially where people start putting their own generation systems on their occupations, where they're not dependent on the current electrical provider. Some background on the building regulation. The building regulation consists of a set of rules. Part thereof is SANS 10400A, which gives the administration portion of the regulation. And there's a whole lot of structural sections on the regulation. But I want to focus today mostly on part T, which is a fire protection of the building regulation. Just want to show you more or less where the building regulation comes from. But when we look at SANS 10400A, it talks about when you look at the list of regulations stated in table 1 on the previous slide, it says that when you use a product in a occupation, you shall have 3 levels of compliance with any product that you use in occupation. First compliance is you need to have a SANS approval stamp or a SANS regulation specific to that product before you can use it in any occupation, which means it has been tested for fire, it has been tested for a safe use in an occupation. And that certification is normally approved for 5 years. In South Africa, currently, we don't have any solar product that is SANS approved or do have a SANS approval stamp on it. Which brings us to the second compliance level, is where a product needs to comply with an agreement certificate. Agreement SA is part of the testing certification of the products, where they test these products for occupational use. And the first of these tests that they do is they test it when there's the existing fire and how these products act in an existing fire scenario. So that's the second level of certification. So if you don't have any of those 2 levels of certifications of any product that you use in the existing occupation, our regulation states that you need a rational design from a competent person, a PR engineer. In this case, it's a structural engineer or a fire engineer that need to provide a rational design to use that products in the existing occupation. So that's where the start point of is in the South African regulation, to make sure that whatever product you're using as a fixed installation, meaning it cannot be moved, it's not a portable item, you need to comply to these regulations. And unfortunately, we are currently at level where you need a rational design from a professional engineer to ensure that the structural stability and the fire compliance are being met for any installation. So when we have a look at the regulation on SAN 10400A, it says that when you do an alteration or addition of the existing occupation, you need to have compliance to the regulation. Now, the regulation been in place since 2008. A lot of people are not aware that the regulation is in place. A lot of people think that the regulation has changed or new laws or regulations has come into place, when in fact these regulations have been in place from 2008 and just need to be implemented. Now, if you have an alteration or addition where you add either PV panels or battery system to existing occupation, there's three major areas where the regulation states that you need to have a look at when you install these items is when you change the structural strength or stability of a building. In this case, you're adding extra weight or extra structure on the existing roof like a PV panel. Or we change existing escape routes and you alter existing escape routes to be less effective. That means where the fire component of the installation have an effect on the existing escape routes and make it less effective. And also will affect the health of persons using the original building. Now, the health of persons using the original building get impacted by primarily fire, where there's existing fire, and how these products act when there is existing fire, whether these products produce a vapor cloud or a gas, a poisonous gas, or whether it burns with a rapid rate or can explode underneath existing fires. So the regulation don't look primarily at when the actual product causes a fire. Yes, it can also, but the regulation looks at how this product act when there's the existing fire and not spread existing fire, don't cause poisonous gas, or don't cause explosions in existing occupations. And yeah, so that's coming from the general principle of SAN 10400. And then it looks at when you have a fire protection or fire installation system, you have to have your engineering sign off on those systems. And also looking at your local authority that is required to have that installation system signed off by appointed engineer. The regulation is very clear. It says that when you don't comply to the regulation, or the information that get certified is incomplete or false, there is some offences that's in place, and the appointment for the engineer needs to be done according to the SAN 10400A, where you appoint your engineer. In this case, will it be for specifically for a solar generation addition to existing building? You need to have your professional registration there and your engineering involved. Now, where the engineer will sign off, he will sign off for the walls, which is a structural component, the roof also a structural component, but there is a combustibility item on the fire side where the resistance and the combustibility of the roof assembly and in the ceiling void need to comply with SAN 10400T. So when we have a look at that, and then the fire protection, where the fire protection measures are in place for a structure to resist a certain time period of fire, and also a fire installation where you have certain measures of fighting existing fire. And in this case, it's where, for example, PV stop plays a role, where you have a fire installation system that can stop an existing fire or control existing fires. Now, these are all part of the regulation and need to be complied with when we do these installations. And then when we sign off on these systems, you have to sign off on the structural system, the fire protection system, where the system is a resistant to existing fire, but also on the fire installation where you provide firefighting equipment to fight existing fires with. Now, when we come to the regulations on the electrical side of things, we have a SAN 60364-7 and 712, which is a requirement for special installations for solar voltaic PV power supply systems. And in this regulation, when a electric installer company do installation, it refers specifically to the fire regulations of South Africa, where you need to comply to the local fire requirements of South Africa. And that is SANS 10400T, which need to be applied. Here's some other items on structural mechanical loading, which for today is not the importance, but the structural items is also referred by this code to specifically codes in SAN 10400, which get reference to the regulations. And then in Annex E on SAN 60364, it says that the electrical products on a PV system do not have an overall enclosure to contain the arcs of fires resulting from the components or wiring faults. Many PV installations operate DC voltage, which are very capable of sustaining DC arcs, which refers to SAN 10400T in terms of the compliance for electrical installations. So when we look at the fire side of combustibility of products and how products are measured for combustibility, out of SAN 10400T, it refers to our testing standards. When we look at components, that's part of a building element. We have facade components. Now, solar panels in most cases form part of the facades of existing buildings, whether it's on a roof or whether it's in walls or in windows. And we have existing regulation looking at that, where they have an existing combustibility over 750 degrees for building materials that form part of the envelope of a building, where they test materials and look at how this material operates when there's existing fire of 750 degrees Celsius, and will it contribute to the fire? Will it spread the fire? Will it burn with a rapid rate? Is there explosion that can originate from this product? Or will it provide poisonous gas for the existing occupation? And then part 6 of this 10177 provides and also for electrical equipment, where you have installation, for example, the inverter, the batteries, where you're looking at the non-combustibility of it for 300 degrees Celsius. So that also measures the other equipment that's inside the occupation. So there is regulation in South Africa how we test these products. And that's why South Africa SAN 10400 looked at you either need to comply to a specific regulation, or you need to have a SANS approved stamp. If you don't have this, then these tests haven't been done on the products, and you either have to have an agreement certificate, or then you have to get a rational design from a competent person, in this case a structural or fire engineer, to be able to assess the use of that product in your occupation. And that's where the engineers comes from when they do the testing of these products and see how do they operate when there's existing fires. Now, a lot of time when we work on PV, we have areas where there is high DC voltage on the roofs, and we have to look at where these products then act and how it then talks to a fire scenario. And when we have a look at the fire protection of the structures, we have to look at how do SANS 10400T goes about in terms of the protection of a existing structure. So SANS 10400T refers to that you have to have a building designed and constructed in a case where there's existing fire, so you have the protection of the occupants or users, including persons with disabilities, to ensure that the provision is made for safe evacuation and for such occupants or users. So your evacuation process of the building is very important when you do occupational planning. Then it goes on and said the spread and intensity of such a fire in such a building must be minimized. So you have to look at how, if there's existing fire, how that fire will spread and whether it will intensify. Also tells you in terms of sufficient stability to retain and to ensure that the structure will not endanger any other building. Provided in multi-story buildings, there will be no failure for structural systems. So you have to look at structural stability when there's existing fire and ensure that these structures are standing in terms of fire safety for fire time to not collapse within these fire scenarios. And you also have to look at the spread of the smoke, need to be minimized, and in terms of the occupational usage. And then you have to have your equipment detecting, fighting, and controlling and extinguishing such fire. The bottom part just talks about the rational design and an opinion of the local authority, how it should be appointed. But in basic, you need to appoint your civil engineer to sign off on your PV system when you install it, whether you like it or not. Now, I know this slide has been used, but I want to go through it again just to show emphasis on certain aspects. What's happening when PV is burning? Now, on this scenario, it's a DC combiner that's arcing, and that arc is actually burning right through the panel there and creates a arc fire. Now, that arc fire you will see have two components. It have a heat component, and it's got a component of smoke that gets produced by this arc generation. So in terms of the fire portion, we're looking at what these fires will cause in terms of whether it provides a poisonous gas, whether it provides for the spread of the fire, or whether it can cause explosion depending on what products are used. To understand what's happening there, here's a slide video to show what's the difference between AC and DC voltage and arc control, just so you can see what happens when you have separation of anode and a cathode on these poles, to understand where this fire or where this arc control is coming from. Now here is on AC, and then the load you will see on the left-hand side will increase on the resistance tubes, and underneath the load, the gap separation will be increased to see if there's any arc forming between the gap separation. You will see a small contact spark there, and then it will stop due to the alternative current that's flowing through the system on 220 volt. So there's not a big arc forming, but when you change that over to a DC arc or DC voltage, you will see the separation arc is quite big happening underneath load. And it's that arc that contributes to a combustibility portion of the equipment, and then can cause combustion to any other material on the roof. Now, there's two components. There's the electrical component on this arc, and there's also a heat component in this arc. With some other panels, dependable on what type of panel that you're using, you have some polymer panels as well. That's also combustible, where the material itself is combustible. Just gonna show this video just to show example of that. So while having a look at it, you can see the smoke and the vapor cloud that's also being formed when these panels are burning, that need to be accounted for when you have existing occupation. Now, this is a American panel. We don't have these panels in South Africa, but you can have panels that have polycarb systems on, that even where there is no electricity flowing through, the panel is still a combustible component. When we look at some portions of the electrical system on a PV installation system, we have a big issue with PV connectors, where you have arcing happening on a PV connector. Here we see arcing happening on an MC4 connector, and it's arcing and it's actually melting away the whole MC4 connector, while the arc happens on a DC level inside that connector. Now, what is the cause of most of these fires? In this case, there was improper crimping of the MC4 connector, which caused a separation gap between the MC4, the anode, and the cathode side of that connector. In most cases, you have where your MC4 connector, the wiring goes into the tube cylinder, where they didn't cut off the electrical wire on the wings of the connector. And then there's a constant arc forming between the wire and the pin connector of the MC4. So it's an installation problem, electrical installation problem, where the equipment hasn't been installed correctly, and where these MC4 then starts to arc due to the shortest path the electrical current will flow in these connectors. So the first level is to make sure that the installation are correct, that these connectors are installed correctly. Here's a video of an installer not doing it right. And you can see on this video where a lack of installation can cause these arcs to happen. Now, that wire must not extend past the wings of the site, and also the equipment used to crimp, that is also not the right equipment to crimp the tube to the wire. You have to have an MC4 crimp and make sure you have positive connection on the wire and on the tube. And that's where most of these connectors cause fires on systems not being done correctly. Also, you have over and under torque on these connectors. We have cracking of the connectors, where water ingress in those connectors cause arcing. Here underneath flow, we picked up arcing on a MC4 connector, heating up due to the current flowing and arcing through that connector. So you have your special tools, for example, on your MC4 connector, where this tool will then start to strip on a torque setting when your your torque range has been met. So it's part of the installation problem that the installer doesn't follow the correct installation of the MC4 where this problem then occurs. In most cases, also you have mismatch of connector manufacturing. You have MC4, you have T4 connectors. So you have to have the same type of connector dependable on what comes with the panel to match those connectors. Otherwise, there will be a mismatch, and then due to the mismatch of these type of connectors, heat forms between that. We have the MC4, which is a multi-contact 4mm diameter pin. We have a WM4, which is a Weidmuller, mostly in Germany, and the T4, the T-line Canadian diameter pin. And they need to match, otherwise you have a mismatch in terms of the connectors forming arc. In some manufacturers provide solutions where a T4, for example, on an MC4 can be used, but it needs to be from the manufacturer to provide safe usage of that mismatch of the connectors. In a lot of areas, we have sharp edges, for example, on the DC wiring, where the sharp edges eat up in the anode or the cathode wiring and then forms a arc where there's no earthing component on the structure. In most cases, insufficient heating causes these panels to overheat. In most of these installation manuals of the solar panels, you'll read that when you install these panels, they need to be a minimum of 100 mils below the panel for ventilation purposes, so that these panels can ventilate and cool down. Even on the edges, for example, of these panels, you need to have a minimum of 6 mil gap so that this heat can escape between large areas of panels where they are in array. And then also in a lot of situations, you have this bird droppings or leaves that covers a cell, and then those cell overheat. I'll go a little bit later on in showing some videos on how these cell overheating happens. You have some other scenarios where you have the insulation of the panel gets damaged with installation, and then an arc forms at the back of the panel. You have dendrine then that forms between the anode and the cathode side of that panel, and then arc formation forms on the panel surface. You have cracked glass, you have bullets going through the panels here on the right. You have animals starting to living in this environment, birds making their nests underneath panels, and all of these contributes to a fire or to an arc forming scenario where these panels then starts arcing and then starts to producing a fire, DC fire on the roofs. Here are some scenarios on what happens and how fire propagation spread on roofs for DC PV panels. On this middle section, you can see on this panels, there's no ventilation underneath the panel, no 100 mils ventilation. So these panels overheated. But the reason for this picture, I want to show you how far this flame propagated on the left, and actually burns up even the aircon on the side of this panel. So the flame propagation and arc forming on these panels are quite extensive. In most scenarios, the arc propagation and flame propagation goes up to 5 meters horizontally, where these panels then overheat or arc. The reason for this video, I want to show you on the PV Stop. Yes, the product is a very good product in stopping the arc, but this video explains a little bit more in terms of how electric current flows through the system and what happens to the system when even your panels are damaged. I just want to have a look, you guys have a look to understand how this electrical current then have an effect on your system.
Philip, just so you're aware, we can't hear the audio, or I can't.
Pardon?
I can't hear the audio on this video. I don't know if that's just me or if everybody else can hear it.
Okay, maybe there is a issue with the sound.
To measure the
Can you hear
electrical
it now?
output. As
Yep.
you can see,
Yeah, it's come through
even
now.
though
Thank you.
Okay, let me just start the video again.
a common misconception is that solar panels stop working if the panels are damaged or broken. In this demonstration, we've connected a series of 20 250 watt solar panels to create a 5 kilowatt solar system. If you look closely at the panels, you'll notice that the glass in each panel is shattered to simulate the damage that might be caused by an event such as a hailstorm. Next, we connect a voltage meter and an amperage meter to the array to measure the electrical output. As you can see, even though every panel in the solar system is damaged, the system is still producing over 650 volts open circuit and nearly 9 amps short circuit current. This is a lethal amount of DC electricity, as you can see by the electrical arc we're drawing between the positive and negative wiring. This demonstrates that even when every panel in the system is damaged, solar systems continue to produce potentially lethal amounts of DC electricity. Even when seriously damaged by fire, solar panels continue to be a serious safety risk. Next, we connect the voltage meter and the amperage meter to the solar panel frame to determine if the damaged panels are leaking electricity onto the frame. The voltage reading is only minor at between 12 and 15 volts, which poses no serious threat of injury. To simulate rain associated with a hailstorm, or water being applied to an incident involving fire, we then apply water to the damaged array to see if water conductivity affects the amount of electricity that leaks onto the solar panel frame. The impact of water is dramatic. The voltage on the frame immediately jumps from between 12 and 15 volts up to nearly 300 volts, creating a potentially life-threatening risk. If the frame arcs onto metal roofing, this can electrify the roof, guttering, and ladders leaning against the roof. This demonstrates that when responding to incidents involving damaged solar systems, such as clearing stormwater damage in wet conditions or attempting to extinguish fire with water, there is a threat of exposing emergency services personnel to unanticipated risks. In events such as short circuits, fires, floods, or storms, PV Stop is the only fast, effective, and safe way to shut down solar systems and mitigate the dangers associated with rooftop solar systems. PV Stop, making solar energy safe.
What I wanted you guys to see is the electrical leakage of the system on the framework of the panels. And on this scenario, when you add water to the structure, it actually enhances the electricity flow. So your earthing component in these structures become very critical in making sure that these floating voltages goes down to earth and protect the structure, especially in steel structures where you have then a live DC structure and where you also have to integrate fire sprinkler systems in this. You're actually making the whole structure live then with DC voltages. So your earthing component in these solar systems become critical, making sure that these systems are then protected against these DC arcs forming. Also responding to PV systems with water, it actually enhances the risk of electrocution on the roof, whether it's the fire department responding to a fire, whether the fire started happening in the structure below, propagating to the roof, or whether it started on a roof at the PV system and then spread to any other areas. So with this in the backdrop and taking this in mind, when we look at PV panels and combustibility of roof coverings in South Africa, The regulation states that when you have a combustible area or material that you place on a roof, for example, that's more than 5% of the roof area, you have to have a rational design from a professional engineer to ensure that this combustibility component of the roof is being met. Then it also gives a section where it states that no area of this combustibility component needs to be more than 20 square meters of area, and dependable on the slopes of your roof, whether it's below 60 degrees or higher than 60 degrees, there need to be at least a 1 meter spacing between these combustibility components that you put on the roof. And if you don't have any of these in place, you have to have then a rational design from a engineer. Now, we use this concept as a guidance also in large scale, even where the roof area component is more than 5% of the roof. And a practical installation will look like this, where you have at least 1 meter gap between your sections of strings. You will try to keep your sections of strings around about at 20 square meters per installation, so that the propagation on these panels then will be controlled in grouping format. In most of the MPPTs of these structures or of these systems, your voltages goes maximum up to about 800 volt. So you will not have more than about 13 to 14 panels per string, which makes it a good string component structure, that you have about maximum 20 to 25 square meters of string components per panel section. So this is how it will look in practice, and also providing access to these panels, whether you're responding to a fire or whether you're doing maintenance on the structure. Also very important is your layout of these installations, giving routes, access routes, walkways, where the panels are located on the roof, so that when responders react to a fire, there is a copy of these layouts at the reception of the building, so that the responders can know where these panels are located on the roofs, and also the access routes to these panels to be able to respond and switch off these panels, whether either by means of disconnecting the DC cables or by means of fire fighting, whether you use a PV stop or other measures to stop the fire on existing systems. That one that I've used here is just a picture of how the installation looks like. In this case, we use the cable tray as a walkway underneath, where we do the separation of the cables, but we also use it as a walkway, so there's a clear walkway guidance on the system for access to these panels on the roof. You also can see here earthing components is very critical in terms of making sure that the arc control of these frames are reduced. But I'll discuss now in a second how these DC voltages in earthing components are major firefighting control measures of making sure that the DC arc don't spread. When we look at the regulation where you have existing occupation and you have a combustible material on an existing roof, and you have higher levels of either openings in occupation or you have step roof occupations, it says that when you have a combustible material on the roof, you shall put that roof material at least 5 meters away from any other opening occupation, whether it's windows or step roof occupation, so that that flame propagation doesn't spread to any other occupation or roof component. That area that you need to protect, for example, in this case on SAN 10400T is 5 meters horizontally and 10 meters vertically. So this is also form part of the rational design that need to be taken account when you install panels on a roof, and also the functionality of where you either need protection or where you must stay away and not install panels on the roof due to occupational protection that is required. In this case is a pure example of what I've just explained, where your PV panels are up to a section close to the windows. This is installation in Pretoria. With the PV panels, there's no 5 meter horizontal gap between the window existing occupation. If these panels, yes, it's on a type of canopy carport structure over, but you need to have a fire control section on this. On this section here, you have also a fire escape route, which also then can compromise that fire escape route. In this scenario, you can see it wasn't designed and signed off as a rational design from a fire engineer concerning the PV installation. When we look at insurance claim happening in South Africa, you have installations being done on roofs, and then all of a sudden you find that the whole roof is gone. And then insurance companies don't understand what happened. In this scenario, it was when we did a report, it was a combination between where the battery was installed and the DC arc path to the panels, where there was an arc control, and then it burned up the whole ceiling void of the occupation. And obviously in this scenario, there was no certification from engineers, so there was no rational design being done to protect the occupational space for the DC arcs. Also, what happens is, for example, panels on thatched roofs, where two combustibility component match each other and is close to each other. In this case, is a bed and breakfast with a PV panel roof over it, and there's no 5 meter gap between the separation on the PV panel and on the thatch roofing. In the right hand side, you have a step roof occupation where the panel can then burn into a step roof occupational, and then also cause combustion of the roof structure itself when there's an arc forming on the structure. So your orientation is very important on PV panels, where to put it, how do you protect your structure in terms of the mounting, where you put the panels, how do you do fire protection of these structures. The structural stability of these panels also important, and then the DC cabling zone, how do you fire compliant the DC route to your inverter and battery from your panels. A big component of this arcing is maintenance in your structure. Now your PV panel becomes a maintenance or a structural component of the roof. It becomes a facade item on your building. And here's a good example of what happens when there's no maintenance being done and on PV panels. So these dropping on the PV panels cause the arc control of the cells. Here is a video showing the thermal conductivity of these cells when there's maintenance issues on these panels, and how there's hotspots starting to be generated in the PV cells, forming dendrites in the existing cells, and where arc control then promulgates from these cells inside the panels. So showing those hot spots, that's where the cell arcing then forms in the panel due to lack of maintenance on these structures, whether it's bird droppings or leaf forming on top of the panel. So maintenance becomes a big portion of controlling these arc controls in your system. Access routes, also a big issue in terms of maintaining it. In this video on the left-hand side, it shows how the guys are actually standing on the PV frames doing maintenance, causing cracks in the panel, which then propagates the DC flow on the frames. If you don't stop calling, then I can't let go when you're drunk and say. So access routes are very important in this installation of PV panels. You have to have your walk routes and also your cabling routes so that it can be controlled in terms of your earthing component of your DC wiring. So in short, to conclude, we need to understand where the building regulations comes from, how it protects your structure. You need to get your certification by a professional engineer that makes sure that this placement of your PV panels are in the right arrangement, and also that it can be fire compliant to the minimum regulation regarding your roof layout. And then also the maintenance on your system that is required going forward to minimize the arc control on these systems. Thank you for your time. I've used a little bit of extra time, but thank you for listening, and I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Willem. This was really very informative. Yeah, so if there's still buddy here, and if you've got time, you're more than welcome to ask. You can just raise your hand. I'm not sure I can unmute you. So yeah, if you can just raise your hand if you've got any questions. But yeah, it was very informative. Question and answers. Thank you, very informative from Rox. Thanks, Rox. Yeah, it's actually, I've been in the industry for a very long time, never worked with an engineer, and I can definitely see how the industry really needs it, and very well formulated together to see exactly why all these things is in place. We worked with quite a few guys working with PV Stop, and everybody wants to make laws and makes laws, but I told them the laws are there. You must just know how to get to it, and that's why we need you guys, the engineers, the fire engineers, to just say it's already there. You just have to comply, and yeah, it's scary. We were that workaround that you can see the installations and the things that I learned from you just today. I learned a lot.
Same here, Willem. That presentation's outstanding. I mean, that's one of the right up there with one of the best that I've seen around solar safety and root cause. Just showing how complicated that challenge really is. And some of those photos and videos, the one that had me literally almost crying was the solar panels with the thatch roof and the two-step installation. It looked like they'd actually stood on the ground and kind of thrown it up there and hoped it sticked. I mean, it's amazing what people will try and do, but it's lack of understanding, education and awareness, and the regulations are super important that drive and underpin the quality of those installations. But just too often we're seeing human error or that mad rush to make hay while the sun shines, and they're cutting out critical elements of the design, planning and installation phase, where a lot of these issues can be completely avoided and should be. But the reality is, I think we're humans. I think we're fundamentally flawed. There's a lot of really, really good people in the solar industry who really want to do the right thing. But it's in our nature to cut corners. and those corners come at a cost. So, I mean, really, on the root cause of all the requirements and specifications around safe solar, absolutely outstanding presentation, Willem, I have to say. Humbled by your technical knowledge and expertise. That I was blown away. Superb. That's really one of the best I've seen.
Thank you. We do also other presentations on battery fire safety, but due to the time restraint today, we just wanted to keep to the PV side of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that we have to raise the awareness, and we've got to get you specialists involved because, so in the future, if it's fine, we want to try and to raise awareness. I will put it on YouTube as well because people learn, and then, yeah, in the future, we can maybe definitely take other topics as well. And because it's the consumer, that's the difference. The prices, everybody's competing. The solar industry went down on the smaller scale, but on the big scale, they're big now. So I'm sure you guys are very busy. But yeah, so if the installers can know it, but I always say you must give the opportunity for the consumer to know as well. Then they will understand why is these new SSEG, EGA compliance certificates, all these things, why are they in place? And everybody is blaming them, but actually they're getting to the right track now. So there's big improvement on that. I opened the mic, so if there's somebody that wants to come on and just ask a question, you're more than welcome.
No, Jan, from my side, it was quite interesting to see. I mean, everything about bird proofing and everything. I mean, we've just looked at what we've cleaned. Sorry, Willem. We do solar cleaning here in Gauteng and other provinces, mostly commercial and industrial. And what I can tell you is the amount of vermin, bird issues and nesting is actually frightening. Hotspots, I mean, yeah, the bird droppings, everything's about performance, but on the safety side and hotspots and arcing and everything, the education is vital. So I learned a lot, and it was quite interesting to see bullet holes was also appeared on your slide. So it seems to be a common thing. We're finding bullet holes quite a bit lately for some reason. So it's interesting.
Yeah, Alex, that's a new thing in South Africa. He shared it with me, cleaned panels, and there was like bullet holes all over. That's Joburg.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I'd have to say that's kind of unique to South Africa, but I doubt
you can add that. You can add that to your slides as well. That could also be a problem.
Bullet holes. Yeah, that's a first for me.
So yeah. Okay, I think everybody's fine. It seems like there's no questions. So, Alex, again, greetings in the UK and greetings to Jim as well.
My pleasure.
And,
of course.
And yeah, Willem, and each one of you that's been here, I really think we learned a lot, and we will keep you updated on the next. We will make a form as well so that if there's a new webinar coming up on a new subject, we will forward it to you. All right.
Brilliant. And thank you for hosting, Johan.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Okay. All right. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Good.
All right. Thanks, guys.